Hello, everybody. Welcome to COP23, the Conference of Parties for the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework of Convention on Climate Change, here in Bonn, Germany. We are at the DHL headquarters in Bonn at the Post Tower, and this is the last transport talk show that's being sponsored by PPMC, the Paris Process on Climate, Mobility and Climate, which is an initiative between SLoCaT and Michelin's Moving On. SLoCaT is the partnership on sustainable low carbon transport. Tonight's theme, our last theme, which is suitable, is the future of transportation. So where are we? How are we doing? Where do we need to go? And how do we get there going forward together? We have an outstanding panel tonight. I'll go through them very quickly, and then we're going to have a nice conversation with each of them. First, we have to my right, Henri Waisman, who's the coordinator of Decarbonization Pathways Project at IDDRI, which is in English, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations. From on my left, we have Paulina Potemski. Everybody here knows I'm really bad with names, so it's perfectly okay.
Mine is easy.
Good. Yep, it is actually. Paulina Potemski, you're the Deputy Head of Unit for Climate from the French Ministry of Ecological Transition and Solidarity. And then to her left, Mariana Panuncio-Feldman, who's a Senior Director from what's known as the World Wildlife Fund, WWF. And finally, Isabel Cavelier Adarve, the Senior Advisor from Mission 2020, which many people know as Christiana Figueira's, one of her great initiatives, who was the previous Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. So, future of transportation, where are we and how do we get there? We're going to start with you first, sort of the science of where are we? What does it look like for transportation now and going forward? And that's sort of what the decarbonization pathways are all about. Maybe you can first start with who are you, why are you here, and then we'll get into the decarbonization.
So, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and giving me this opportunity. So I'm with the IDDRI, so the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, which is a think tank based in Paris, directed today by Teresa Ribera, former Secretary of State in Spain, and founded by Laurence Tubiana, who played a key role in all the process, notably during the Paris Agreement. The way IDDRI sees its role in general in all this process is to follow two tracks. On the one hand, a direct support to the negotiations themselves by facilitating the dialogue between people directly engaged in this discussion. And on the other hand, a parallel track that needs to feed this process, which is the support to research that is relevant to inform some of the key questions that the negotiator in the end need to tackle. And what I've been in charge of at IDDRI, which is this Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project, the DDPP as we call it with this small name, is an attempt to understand what does it take to decarbonize the economy. Decarbonizing meaning reducing the emissions to the long term in a way that's consistent with the climate objective. So in the Paris Agreement we have today the objective to meet what we call the well below 2C or 1.5C objective. Concretely it means that during the second half of the century we need to be collectively at the global level to net zero emissions, so no more emitting than what is naturally captured by the system. And this requires very strong action on all the system, notably on the energy system, which has been the focus of the DDPP so far. And the attempt of the DDPP is actually to understand concretely what are the concrete transformation and the concrete actions that need to be taken from now to 2050 and afterwards in order to make this transformation possible.
And 2050 sounds to some like it's so far away, but it's really around the corner when you're talking about building infrastructure, making decisions in policy that are going to be setting the course for businesses and for building, et cetera. So I know that you were here recently, and as it relates to transportation, there's a new report that came out. Maybe you can explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. The objective of the DDPP, the general idea is actually that if you want to inform concretely the action that needs to be taken now, you need to understand where you want to be in the end, or because given all these inertias in the system that the system cannot change overnight, you need to understand where you want to go in order to be able to direct the process. So we've run, in the lead up to Paris, so before the Paris Agreement, the DDPP, which was an economy-wide assessment of these deep decarbonization pathways. And what we've done now and what we've published during the Transport Days a few days ago is the first sectoral focus of the deep decarbonization pathways principle, which is an attempt which is focused on transport. So we selected the transport sector as the priority for us just because transport today represents around 1/4 of emissions. It's widely recognized as a very difficult sector to decarbonize. This is confirmed by the limited ambition in current nationally determined contribution for this specific sector, so the contribution that have been put forward by the countries at COP21. And this has been also confirmed by the first step of the DDPP, in which globally we managed to reach the ambitious objective, but we also identified that the transport sector was one of the key sectors that required some really deep dive in order to be able to identify the concrete options that could be mobilized in order to trigger this deep transformation.
So that sounds like that was one of the key findings, after you've done this analysis, you figured out, all right, so looking forward to decarbonize the economy, specifically in this very important sector, what were the linchpin actions that could be taken? What were the key findings? So a couple of them.
So the analysis that we've done and that we've published is based on a first step, and it's an ongoing process, but we've already investigated 4 countries, France, the UK, Mexico, and Japan, where we've worked with teams that developed what they identified as meaningful transformation, deep decarbonization transformation for their transportation. And beyond the details of those country analysis, there are some, when we take a step back from this analysis, there are some cross-cutting messages that we can take from these studies. And interestingly,
before you continue with what were the 4 countries again?
The 4 countries, France, the UK, Mexico, and Japan, and we are planning to go to other countries
So nice that you went to the different regions, etc. Okay,
exactly.
Sorry, I just want to make sure we all heard that. Now, what were the key cross-cutting messages?
So the cross-cutting messages, and these countries were also selected because they are very different and they have very different challenges when it comes to transport. And one of the first key messages is actually that it is possible to decarbonize deeply the transport sector consistently with the objective of the Paris Agreement while satisfying the needs of the people. And that's a key thing because obviously we are not here to just build an opposition between whether we want to support development or reduce emissions. And we demonstrate that in the transport sector specifically, it's possible to do both together. It's also even possible to imagine the decarbonization transformation in a way that can help address some of the key challenges of the people today, like alleviating the time and the budget burden that transport has on the people, notably the constrained transport, the daily transport that everyone has to do to go to work, to go to do his daily shopping, etc. So the analysis shows that it's possible to do all of that consistently.
You were able to prove that sustainable transport is good for the budget and for time burden.
We've been able to prove that it can be good.
Can be good.
And it can be good under certain conditions.
Yes.
And these conditions notably depend on the way you implement this decarbonization. And 2 main conditions are, on the one hand, to adopt systemic vision. You need to, you cannot consider all the actions independently because otherwise there may be some contradictions in there. You need to do, to manage mobility demand. You need to do energy efficiency. You need to make sure that people use different fuel that would be low carbon. But one of the interesting findings is that depending on the way you do it, you can find some synergies between these different actions. Just for example, if you implement mobility demand management, if you implement energy efficiency, then it's easier to decarbonize the transport system and to facilitate the diffusion of the low carbon fuel. And a second conclusion is that decarbonizing the transport sector in a way that's very aligned with your initial introduction, it requires forward-looking policies. You need to know where you want to land in 2050 if you want to take the right action. For example, it's obvious that we will all need in 2050, for example, a massive diffusion of electric vehicles by then, notably for constrained mobility. But what we demonstrate is that if you want to do that in a smooth manner, you need to start now. What we are talking is about enabling the ramp-up, the fast ramp-up in the next years in order to enable a progressive diffusion of these technologies and make them available at scale when they will be required in the second half of the century.
I wish with each of you, I feel like we're going to wish we had a half an hour, but that is excellent to hear that basically you're building the case with evidence and across the world with different case studies to what we've been hearing basically for 2 weeks, which is an integrative approach is truly the way for solutions, and also that forward-thinking plans is what is needed for unfurling basically these solutions that will be inclusive and safe and efficient, et cetera. So that's fantastic. We're going to come back to you again with the question we've been asking everybody, and we'll have a chance for some conversation at the end. But we're going to move next to Paulina from the French government here, who's been working a lot on, I think, what you've been talking about, transportation, as well as other things. Before we dig into the work on transportation, can you quickly speak about what you're doing here, who you are?
Yep. Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. I work for the French Ministry of Ecological Transition and Solidarity. I am part of the French negotiation team, but I don't do negotiations. I am the coordinator for the initiatives of the Global Climate Action Agenda that are supported by France in different sectors: oceans, water, construction, buildings, and transport. And so my role is to help the initiatives that were implemented, that are doing concrete projects, that are having a working program, to stimulate what they're doing, to help them with political support, to also allow them to find new ways of funding the continuation of their activity.
Excellent.
And so at COP23, I am not in the negotiation rooms. I'm really happy about it. But I am on the Bone Zone, where we have a French pavilion, and in order to promote also the action of those initiatives, we have a program of 50 side events for the 2 weeks. And those initiatives are able to broadcast what they're doing, and sometimes we also have our ministers that are coming to
So there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, yes.
And the action agenda, or the global action agenda, there's a lot of words for it actually within, but this landscape of opportunities for non-party stakeholders to engage and bring solutions, et cetera, collaborate it's been happening for quite a few years. And France, the government of France has been incredibly active in it. And you're going to continue it. That's the future of transport. You've recently launched a specific initiative, maybe the Transportation Decarbonization Alliance. Maybe you can speak to that in particular, and we can talk about some others.
So France didn't launch it because it's a participatory process. It's an idea that came out of a discussion with the Paris process on mobility and climate with the Netherlands, Costa Rica, Portugal, and France, in order to get together some front-running countries, regions, cities, and also companies who have an avant-garde of leading by action, not by example, but by action, and to have this small community, but that is front-running and that is stimulating the others to take the pathway of decarbonizing transportation in the upcoming years. And so it was on the 11th, so on Saturday, on the French Pavilion, we had the establishment of the Transport Decarbonization Alliance.
Excellent, yeah. And so this is another one of those opportunities where governments are seizing these global conferences basically to grab the stage and announce that they are forward-leaning, they're collaborative, they're drawing on the intelligence that's out there, the research to show that they're,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a coincidence maybe that you were one of the pilots. Maybe this is a coincidence. So this is fantastic to hear. Are there other initiatives on transportation in particular that you'd like to elaborate on?
Well, I would like to talk to you about what is going on in France right now on the transport, in the transport field. Our new minister, Madame Borne, who is a woman, very proud of it.
Yes.
She has launched, under the high patronage of our Prime Minister, something that is called Les Assises de la Mobilité. So it's a mobility process that will lead to a new framework law in early 2018. So it was a process launched on September 19th, and it's lasting 3 months. And again, this is, I think, a kind of French willingness to make non-state actors, the civil society, local authorities, companies, and citizens to get together, discuss, in order to feed what the administration and the government can put in the new mobility law. The idea is to use the needs of the territories and the needs of the citizens that live there in order to have a law that would help them use the transportation and mobility in their today life.
That's excellent to hear that they're doing that. That's a very practical
Absolutely.
Forum for
Yeah.
what we're hearing, and many times we've actually had people come up in the last 2 weeks and talk about, you can build a train that goes from X to A to B, but if it's not in the community where it needs to be, or the users
Yeah.
haven't been consulted and it's not designed for them, it's a bad sustainable transport device. So
The
that's
idea
great.
is to
Consultation's
not
key.
to have a top-down approach, but really to understand what are the real needs of those
Excellent.
that use transportation
Excellent,
on
excellent.
a daily basis.
So France has clearly been a leader in the action area space, very welcome of a consultative process, which is also the future, I think, of transportation, is we keep on hearing about integration. We'll hear more about that. Do you want to speak quickly about maybe...
I just wanted to add
Yes.
something to you that, this is not France leading.
Yes.
We cannot do anything alone. So international cooperation is very important. And there is another thing that is going on in France on December the 12th. We are having a finance summit. It is called One Planet Summit. It will deal with the need to stimulate financing to continue the climate actions. And there's a website that was launched a few days ago. It's called oneplanetsummit.org, and you will find all the information you were waiting for.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Wonderful. All right, so clearly stakeholder engagement from all areas, but especially transportation, because we're talking about this with quarters of the emission. There's lots of opportunities ahead. Our next guest, Mariana Panuncio-Feldman, has been working at this space for quite some time here at the COP. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of that, please introduce yourself and what are you doing here this time?
So hello, good afternoon, good evening. So yes, my name is Mariana. I work for World Wildlife Fund, and why we're here as an organization. We're a civil society organization that is committed, as everyone around this panel, to the successful implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we see our role as civil society, I would say, in two fronts. One is right now national governments are setting up the rules for implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we see our role as civil society organization to encourage governments to develop robust implementation guidelines, because that will ensure that governments can develop actions that are transparent, understandable, and that can create trust in the global community and can create a sense of accountability. And we provide inputs and provide support for the process. But we also see that a lot of action is happening outside, and therefore we think that one important process that has been gaining traction is bringing that energy, that innovation, those examples from the outside world inside the walls of the negotiations, basically showing by example, through the examples of initiatives that we have as an organization, as well as in partnerships with many others, that there is tremendous appetite for climate action in transport and in other sectors, and that there is a great opportunity for us to implement the commitments that countries have made, but really also accelerate the pace.
So thank you. So maybe, so there's a lot of informal ways that civil society and other stakeholders come here and they showcase their best practices, they have booths, they have events, etc. But also the UNFCCC and the parties have welcomed stakeholder support and engagement in very formal ways.
Yes.
Can you sort of explain a couple of those opportunities that have just recently opened up in the last couple of years?
Yes. So what I would like to highlight are the following spaces. When we're thinking about increasing climate action, basically, scaling up our efforts to reduce emissions, to prepare ourselves for the impacts of climate change, we need to think in, it's a continuum of action, but it helps to think in terms of different time frames. You have a time frame of urgent action between now and 2020, and you also have a space for action that is post-2020. Some of it in the next 10 years. The targets that countries have set for themselves are, for almost all countries, policies through 2030, but also there's the long-term direction of travel, which is these long-term strategies. And so the question is, how can non-state actors, the so-called non-state actors, so city governments, subnational governments, private sector, civil society, how can they contribute to this? And maybe the channels that I would highlight are, one, there are these so-called technical expert meetings where basically parties, national governments, and non-state actors can come together to have a solutions-oriented conversation that is very much aimed at, short-term actions or actions that can be taken now to really speed up the work before 2020. And this is an opportunity-driven conversation, a solutions-driven conversation aimed at really encouraging further action. Another channel that is important to highlight is this bridge that has been created between the inside and outside that Paulina was talking about, what is now called the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action, or also known as the Global Climate Action Agenda. And basically, this is a space in which there's an opportunity to show examples by cities, by private sector, by civil society of, again, action in different thematic areas. So we're talking not only about transport, we're also talking about industry, we're talking about cities and subnational governments, energy, oceans, fresh water, forests, agriculture. So lots of places where the transportation needs to take place and lots of places where action is taking place now. And so that's a great opportunity. It's like a market forum of ideas and actions and examples. And the third one I would like to highlight is what is called the Talanoa Dialogue. So
say that slower. Talanoa Dialogue.
So Talanoa Dialogue. So
the
amazing thing about the UNFCCC process is that we basically, it's a place where we get, and we bring ideas from all over the world, and for the benefit of the global community. And so the presidency of Fiji, which now has the presidency of the COP, has brought this tradition from the Pacific Islands, which is called Talanoa. And Talanoa is a tradition, a cultural tradition in the Pacific Islands. It's a way of addressing and solving conflict that is aimed, basically, its primary aim is to have facilitate a frank dialogue that ultimately what it aims to produce is something that is better for the collective good. And so that spirit and that approach is being brought to a process that parties decided, which was recognizing that the targets that were put on the table in 2015 were important to put us in the right direction, but not sufficient. There was a recognition that we needed to come together, parties needed to come together again to take stock of actions, progress towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, but then say, how can we speed up this effort?
Absolutely.
How can we go farther? And so there are three questions that the Talanoa Dialogue aims to help answer. One is where are we? The other one is, where do we need to go? And the other one is, how do we get there? And so this process will take place over the coming year, and it will culminate in COP24 next year.
In Poland. Excellent. So just to recap really quickly, there's like the technical expert meetings, which have been ongoing for years, but it's like a roundtable kind of workshop opportunity for solutions. And then there's also the Global Climate Action Agenda, which has a lot of different opportunities for engagement. It's kind of nondescript, to be honest, but it's the solution space that many, including the transport sector, has been SLoCaT in particular, and PPMC has been very engaged in for many, since quite a few years. And then there's the facilitated dialogues, officially called that, which Fijian presidency has called the Talanoa Dialogue, which is participatory dialogue about going forward to COP24.
And maybe
which you described in much better detail than I just did, but just so we can summarize very quickly. We'll have to come back to you for the next part, if that's okay, just because time is tight. And our next speaker, Isabel, is going to be speaking on sort of, again, future transport. We have a lot going on here, but we also have a big, beautiful future ahead with other opportunities that are going to help solutions, urgency be driven, and your organization has been helping some of that. So maybe you can first explain who you are, why you're here, and then help us spell out the landscape going forward.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yes.
And thank you for inviting us tonight. So why am I here? I'm here for two reasons. The first one is to remind, the second one is to recruit to remind everyone about the need for speed. What a nice opportunity to be speaking to a crowd interested in transport, to talk about the need for speed in reaching what we know is the climate turning point by 2020. We can talk about the details of that later, but we know that 2020 is a key date, not just for that political process that both Mariana and Paulina have been describing, but also for science. And recruiting, because Mission 2020 is now going to be your mission, as well as my mission. All of you are recruited tonight for being part of this mission.
Oh, perfect said. Okay, and so I think we're already recruits, though, unfortunately, so we're going to have to get more on board.
That's why we're here tonight.
Okay, that's why we're here on board. Okay, so we're helping you recruit.
Exactly.
So, in addition to, we have COP23 is almost wrapped up. But there's been lots that have happened here. I think we've done a good job. We have the Paris One Planet Summit in December. We have a lot of opportunities around the corner. Can you sort of spell out for the transport community, what are other summits, conferences, not just for the sake of having a summit and conference, but other opportunities for engagement going forward and their theory of change, if you will, a little bit?
Absolutely, Tracy. So that's all about that political process that we're talking about. But let me start by why the science tells us that that political process has to make 2020 a key year. So since Paris, we've adopted this 1.5 to 2 degree objective. The science is telling us if we are to reach that objective, of course we have a carbon budget, about 800 gigatons of carbon equivalent that we can spend. And the only way of staying within that budget, given the inertia in the system, and stay within the window of opportunity for reaching that 1.5 and 2 degrees is for us to bend the curve of emissions by 2020. The good news is that we all know this is necessary. We know it's desirable. It has excellent, good consequences. But the good news is it's also achievable. So let's say we have this turning point. We have this process to get there. The real economy is moving there. You've all been speaking about how exciting the bond zone is, all of these actors moving on. The political process needs to get there too. So what's the arc of events taking place? We've already spoken about the Macron Summit. We have Davos, of course, key moment for the global economy. We will have next year a moment that will be very important for non-state action, the California Global Summit for Non-State Actors, where we expect to gather the global community that is working, not the states, but to tell the states, to tell the national governments how much is already being done and how much the non-state actor community, the city governments, the state level governments, the private sector, the investor community, citizens are truly holding their backs and moving ahead very quickly and showing how we can actually make it on time to this turning point. We will have, of course, COP24 next year, where the Talanoa dialogue will have to occur and yield all of the good conversations that will have happened during 2018. We will have an interesting, important political moment by September 2019, hosted by the UN Secretary General in New York, back to back with the General Assembly, and that will of course lead to the key year 2020, where we will need to see state governments raising their ambition, but we are going to see the economy showing the sign that we will have reached that turning point, that global emissions will have started to decline. Otherwise, what we will have done is we will have locked in a world with a higher temperature that will mean an unmanageable transition for the economy, a miserable future for humanity, and of course an existential threat to ecosystems upon which we depend. So if we want to have a transition that is manageable, that is just, and that will be an opportunity for ecosystems to adapt, because climate change already happened, we will need to reach the turning point by 2020.
Yeah.
And that's what the political process will need to deliver, along with the economy that will have to continue moving.
Yeah, I mean, I think just a point of reflection, when you look back, 10 years ago at the climate landscape and who was working on it, and it was really, many people were just pointing to governments. It was just, governments fix it, and it was all, alone, they were all alone, right? Everyone was just pointing fingers at governments. And now, and it was a struggle, and it really didn't succeed because it can't succeed. And since then, there's been this galvanization of all of these different actors saying, all right, we're all in this together, clearly, despite any sort of setbacks by individual countries or reticent sectors or what have you. And now there's a plethora of opportunities for stakeholders in all different sectors, especially transport where it's most very much needed, energy, others as well. To engage, and that I think is really a key takeaway. There's urgency, et cetera, but there's these opportunities, including formally, informally, et cetera. So before we go to the audience and get some questions, is there anything you want to compliment, any comments on each other's?
Maybe if I can. I'd like to thank the organizers for having brought us together, because basically all the three interventions that came just after mine illustrate some key channels through which some bridging could be made. So just to pick very quickly some examples, the deep decarbonization pathways for transport has been supported by the Michelin Corporate Foundation. So it's a space to try to bring together national scale transformation and private actors, key to the transformation of the transport sector. The example that was obviously with our French hat in IDDRI, we are part of this Assise de la Mobilité, which have been mentioned earlier, and we are trying to bring some insights that could be useful to design the French policies together with many other actors. And when it comes to the Talanoa dialogue, the facilitative dialogue, and the revision of NDCs to 2020 that's planned in the Paris Agreement, the real question that we will have to face now is the dialogue is necessary, but what do we discuss about? What is the topic of the discussion? And if we want really to support this ambition mechanism, the topic of the discussion should not be about the targets themselves. The targets are owned by the countries. They will be self-defined by the countries themselves. We need to go beyond these targets. We need to understand the underlying transformation at the sectoral level, and if we manage to do that, then this facilitative dialogue can deliver what will be required to revise the NDCs afterwards.
Absolutely, because the targets are just these large, singular objectives, and you really need to unpack it to deliver on implementation. Did you want to add something?
I think that that's absolutely right, and maybe the only piece that I wanted to highlight on the Talanoa dialogue is that part of what is being discussed right now is how we structure it in a way that it is practical, it is concrete, and becomes not just parties talking to each other, but we really bring all of the lessons of the research and the experiences that these non-state actors have to share. So there is right now, I think, a lot of opportunity that I hope that we can leverage, so that over the course of the coming year, we provide inputs that, like you said, Henri, are concrete, that really show how we can accelerate the pace, meet the deadline that is needed with the urgency and the ambition that is needed, but based on very concrete examples that are sectoral in nature, like for transport.
Well said. Any other comments?
Actually, this is, it's perfect, because it shows also how the whole Californian summit is designed in such a way that what it plans to do is to really showcase, of course, all of that ambition, but also capture it, aggregate it, and then deliver it to COP23 at that Talanoa dialogue.
COP24.
COP24. Thank you. You're right. It's this urgency, and I.
Yes.
You wanted it.
Yeah, I wanted it already now.
It's so urgent that time is folding back on itself.
Exactly. But so yeah, that's the case. So there are various different desired outcomes or visions that should come out of that Californian summit, of what all of that galvanizing momentum in the non-state actor, and one of them is definitely the electrification of mobility. How are we going to do that as fast as we need to do it? I mean, in some countries, the pace is really amazing. The economy is already showing that this is, I mean, I'm sure you've been talking all week about this.
Yeah, we have.
India and China.
And China, India, Norway, UK.
Right, it's
France.
just
There's
unbelievable.
a lot of great pledges on it.
Exactly.
But how? That's and so that it's equitable, accessible,
exactly.
safe.
Exactly, but it's
all
happening.
of those things. But it's happening.
It's happening. So California is all about let's show it's happening, let's aggregate it, let's deliver it to the
Yes.
process. So these connecting phases between the real economy's progress and the political process are going to be
Excellent.
really critical in the next
Yeah.
3 years.
And so it doesn't lead to congestion, but actually adds to solutions. Before we go to your final things, what is the dates for the California Summit for those that don't? And does it have an official name?
The Global Summit for Non-State Action, is that correct?
The Global
Climate Action Summit. Thank
The
you.
glo-
Thank
the-
you.
the
Global
Global
Climate Action
Climate Action
Summit.
Summit.
And yes, it is 12 to 14 September in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that you were talking about Talanoa dialogue, and this is something that it's not party-driven, as you said, but parties, as my government is, specifically in transportation, are supportive of the fact that the non-state actors are willing to do, because this is also a cooperation about the national governmental efforts and what the non-state actors are doing. And from our perspective, it's crucial to support the non-state actors to continue doing things, even though it's not party-driven.
That's
and
fantastic.
shouldn't be.
Yes. We're going to go to a question from the audience. Do we have a question from the audience? Yeah. And then we're going to do some videos from Views on the Street, wrap up with a question, 30 seconds each or so, and then we're going to wrap up. Yes. Oh, shy are we? Okay, none other. All right. So the last question for each of you. Oh, wait, before we do that, let's do the view from the street. Are we ready for that? View from the street. We have Maxime from France and Lorenzon from Seychelles. They're going to tell us their views on sustainable transport, and then we'll hear yours.
I think sustainability in transport maybe like being more multimodal, using more transport modes when going somewhere, going to more soft mobility, like in Nice, where it is a very sunny place. It's very a pleasant moment when I can go to school riding a bike along the seashore. So that's going soft modes, and I think also maybe not owning a transport mode anymore, like owning my car, but only sharing it with other people. I think that's the beginning of something more sustainable in transport.
Sustainable transport for me is getting people from one place to another in the most efficient manner, as fast as possible, but with as low emission as possible. I would like to see improved public transportation. At the moment, the buses are working on diesel. I think they can be improved and work on things like electric or hydrogen fuel cells. I would also like to see more lanes for bicycles. At the moment, there's no lanes on the roads for bicycles, which doesn't encourage people to use bicycles, which is one of the most efficient forms of transportation. So I would like to see better infrastructure for bicycles, and maybe also introduction of electric bicycles.
Excellent, thanks so much. So those are two people from the COP23. Thanks my team for interviewing people. We're going back to our last question of the day, which everyone for the last 2 weeks has been asked. You can't answer, there's no silver bullet. You have to come up with a single solution. What is a pragmatic action the transport sector could take to transform itself or be transformed right now? You're first.
There is no silver bullet. One specific measure worth mentioning on urban transport, and that's an experience that comes from my city in Paris, where we've seen this example, is we need, if we want to prepare the development of public transport in these cities, notably in the mega cities, we need to save space, notably on the road, dedicated to these modes in order to prepare the future development. And this competition for space between the different modes is something that is key and that requires this forward-looking perspective, because if we wait, then we will not have the possibility to develop the public transport at the scale where it needs to be developed if we want to reach the ambitious climate objectives.
Excellent. Okay, so wise use of space designing urban planning, I would say. All right.
My turn?
Yes, I won't summarize yours like I did his, I promise.
And it's a very personal opinion. I think that education is crucial, and that introducing climate and sustainable development education in schools from a very early age could help shape a way that the future citizens will consume and the way they will be making their mobility choices in the future.
Excellent.
One solution, enhanced public transit powered by renewable energy. I think that with that we get multiple benefits. We get lower congestion, we get improved health, we all walk more, and we get climate benefits too.
Excellent. Yes. Isabel.
Dovetailing as usual with Mariana. Really go big on zero emission zones in cities, with last mile electric freight, with improved walkability, with bans on petrol and diesel. That would be something we can do right now. It's trending.
Excellent.
It's cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
And more cities are doing it. Excellent
Yeah.
ideas. I think great flowers for a bouquet of solutions. I love them all. And we've had a fantastic conversation tonight, which I think for the future of mobility or future of transport has really re-emphasized, first of all, the need for science, the need for governments and civil society, and additional opportunities for engagement and collaboration to be provided because it is urgent. But there are solutions out there that are possible for us to transform the sector and to address climate change right now, which is fantastic. If you haven't seen all of the talk shows, please do, because we've had urban and transportation, and I mean, it's truly been a wealth of information. It's been really delightful. I want to give a huge thanks to my team who helped produce this. Including Mark and Danielle and Nicola, to High Blue in Bonn, who's the production, to PPMC. I see we have a surprise guest here who's going to maybe say some comments, to Henri, to Paulina, to Mariana, to Isabel tonight, and to all the guests who've been here for the last 8 days, and to DHL headquarters for having us here. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone.
Well, there's one which we obviously have to thank, and first of all, also good evening. My name is Holger Dalkmann. I'm the co-chair of the Sustainable Low Carbon Transport Partnership, and the one person is in fact Tracy, and so she had done such a wonderful job. But also we have,
Thank you.
as you said, we have a whole team. So I'd like also at the end also bring also the whole team here. So please also join us also on stage for the closing. Come on, so that everybody also sees who's behind that. Meanwhile, also they're coming. Don't be shy. Meanwhile, they're coming up. Also,
Excellent.
I think. Besides also really thanking you, stepping in and helping out and being also the champion, so you haven't recognized.
Where's the flowers? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, there's a. I thought I bought I thought we'd get flowers, but you have to fly tomorrow. So here's a card from the whole entire team.
That's so sweet. Oh my God, I'm really embarrassed right now. This is so sweet. Thanks, you guys.
So thanks again. And so our last greetings actually from the whole team also goes to Corny Heusinger, who is actually the director of the Sustainable Low Carbon Transport Partnership. Couldn't be here with us today, but we also say all hi also from Shanghai to Shanghai from Bonn. So
hi,
Corny. But the last word is also with you, so what is your one last solution?
Oh my goodness, I didn't think I'd get that question. You know what, I think it's education. I think it's education, and there was a lot of there's opportunities about education in your driver's license, education about the SDGs and climate in classrooms, education in industry, education.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. Thanks everybody. Thanks everybody from COP23. Thank you DHL. Thanks PPMC. Thank you all. Thanks everybody here tonight. Have a great evening. Thanks High Blue in Bonn. Thank you.
See you in Katowice.
Thanks Richard. Thanks Michael.